Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production, available on Apple Podcasts and Podcast One.
Okay, so I've been saying how crazy it is that it's already spring, but you know what that means? That means next up is summer. I know, so strange, but it's coming up quick. I personally love a wax any time of the year, but especially during those summer months, waxing really is just a must-have for me, and I know a lot of my girlfriends do it too. So when it comes to waxing, I'm a big fan of European Wax Center because when you go there, you get the best by the best. Their certified wax specialists are trained in prepping, protecting, and pampering your skin, all very important things. And did you guys know that as the experts in wax, European Wax Center is also the expert of skin? I really believe it's important to exfoliate, moisturize, take care of all of that beautiful skin all over your body. And I love that European Wax Center knows how important that is too. So they just released an all new line of products that are specifically designed to pair with waxing. These new products make the best wax even better. And when you do over 7.5 million bikinis a year, wow, you know you're getting only the best. Plus, they've added enhanced health and hygiene measures for extra confidence and care. European Wax Center is so confident that you'll love the service and products that they're offering all first-time guests their first wax free. Visit waxcenter.com to book your reservation today. Check out the new line of products, and remember that first wax is free.
Podcast One presents Fully Booked by Kirkus Reviews, the ultimate insider's scoop on the best new books. Every week, Kirkus brings you author interviews, recommendations from the bestseller lists, and insights into books that are not yet on your radar.
Hi, I'm Megan Labrise, editor-at-large of Kirkus Reviews. Welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining us. Our guest today is Melissa Febos, author of Girlhood, an exquisite essay collection out now from Bloomsbury that contends with the pleasure, pain, and power of what it means to be a girl and to become a woman. Febos's intricate essays contemplate body shaming, mother-daughter relationships, precocious sexuality, and platonic touch with, quote, consistently illuminating, unabashedly ferocious writing, end quote. That's from Kirkus's starred review of Girlhood, and here's just a little bit more. Quote, in her latest powerful personal and cultural examination, Febos interrogates the complexities of feminism and the darkness that has defined much of her life and career. Profound and gloriously provocative, this book, a perfect follow-up to her equally visceral previous memoir, Abandon Me, transforms the wounds and scars of lived female experience into an occasion for self-understanding that is both honest and lyrical, end quote. Melissa Febos is the author of Whip Smart and Abandon Me. She is the inaugural winner of the Jean Cordova Prize for Lesbian Queer Nonfiction from Lambda Literary, among many other honors. And she is an associate professor in the nonfiction writing program at the University of Iowa. She joins us from Iowa soon, and I will be joined by my colleague Johanna Zwerner, who you may know from her excellent reading recommendations on the episodes when we're lucky enough to have her join the editors segment. For today, she'll be my co-host, and we'll be interviewing Melissa together. But first, in this sponsored interview, I'm talking with author Andrea Wang and illustrator Jason Chin about their new children's book, Watercress, out now from Neil Porter Books. In Watercress, a Chinese-American family pulls their car over to gather wild watercress growing by the Ohio roadside, unearthing memory and deep emotion in this poignant and profound picture book. Kirkus calls Watercress, quote, understated, deep, and heartrending. Bring tissues, end quote. Starred review. And now Andrea joins us from Colorado, and Jason joins us from Vermont. Welcome, Andrea and Jason, to Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Watercress has an author's note and an artist's note at the back of the book. Andrea, yours opens with this sentence. This story is about the power of memory. Would you talk a little bit about what you mean by that and your inspiration?
Sure. For me, this was a book that came out of a memory that haunted me for a long time. I kept remembering picking watercress by the side of the road, and I didn't understand why. I would remember this at really odd moments. It would just pop up. So I wrote Watercress. In its original form, it was a personal essay trying to figure out why why this memory meant so much to me. And from there, it morphed into a picture book, and it was in third person originally. And then I brought it into first person after realizing that I needed that structure to make it, carry the emotional weight that I wanted it to.
Right. I love the words you choose for this picture book, especially these lines. My parents cut bunches of the small plant, long stringy stems with leaves round as coins. I feel like I'm always going to see that when I see watercress now.
That's great.
And of course, also, Jason, your beautiful watercolor illustrations, I'll see those too. And the illustration that accompanies these words specifically, it's a painting of the story is told by a girl, and it's her mother, father, and brother cutting watercress on the edge of a cornfield. Well, pulling it up in the brother's case. But I wanted to ask you, to get it started, what was it about Andrea's story that struck you, that made you want to illustrate it?
The manuscript was just too good to turn down. It was. I said to my editor, texts like this don't come along very often. Yeah. And I think the line that hit home for me was feeling ashamed of being ashamed of my family. I just thought that was so powerful. It is certainly a feeling that I've had in the past.
Right. Andrea, could we talk about a little bit about that line in so few words? I mean, just even hearing Jason speak it on in this interview, like a whole feeling washes over me. So
yes, when I wrote the story in its final form, I was reaching really deep and crying as I wrote it, and that line just came out, and it was probably the first time that I brought it into sort of my conscious awareness that I had been ashamed of my family, and I was now feeling ashamed of being ashamed of them. When I was little, I did not really understand why I didn't belong in my small, mostly white town. I mean, and I blamed and resented my parents for making me different. Not that they could have done any differently. We were Chinese and there was no changing that. And so I wanted to understand how the events in my parents' lives shaped them. And as I grew older, I understood more of their history. So that's where that line came from.
Right. Jason, you've written and illustrated your own books for young readers, Redwoods, Coral Reefs, Grand Canyon, and they really spotlight natural beauty. And I wanted to ask you, how did you conceive of capturing the natural beauty of both Ohio and China in this book? What was your research like?
Well, for the scenes in Ohio, I knew there was going to be a lot of corn. So luckily, when I started this book, it was late July and the corn was tall. So I went out and I painted corn in some fields near where I live, just to get the feel for it, to kind of try and understand the plant. And as I was doing it early on, it occurred to me that corn and bamboo have some real similarities. They're both grasses, and they're also iconic plants of China and America. So I kind of hit on that idea of making that into a motif in the book. When I came to doing the images of China, I had to do a lot more research, but that played into it. I chose to set the scenes in Sichuan province, where there are a lot of bamboo grows there.
It's very beautiful. Andrea, what was the experience of seeing these illustrations of your story for the first time?
More tears, happy tears this time. I like books that make me cry, and this one makes me cry. And the writing of it and our illustrations, I just thought they were amazing. It really captured my family, our personalities, the landscapes that I grew up in and that my parents grew up in. And it really resonated with me. Yeah, I think the art complements the text beautifully and adds so much depth and richness.
I completely agree. Now thinking about, our current situation where everything it seems so remote, specifically, Jason, have you had any interesting virtual experiences of sharing your art with kids in the last year?
Oh, yeah, well, not this book because it's not out yet, but I've done, I've switched to doing virtual school visits, and it's, it's been a learning curve, but one of the nice things is that since I'm broadcasting from my studio, I can turn the camera onto my desk and draw pictures for them and with them, and do watercolor paintings and do things that I couldn't do in the classroom because I can't bring all of my paints into the classroom all the time. So that's actually been a kind of a silver lining.
Andrea, do you have plans to share Watercress with young readers virtually? And will you two do any events together?
Yes, Jason and I are doing several events together, starting with our launch event on the 30th of March. And then I think most weekends in April, actually, where we'll be doing story times as well as answering questions. I believe I have some virtual author visits also set up. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing Watercress with young readers.
Before we bid one another adieu, I'd like to ask each of you, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about the book? Starting with you, Jason.
I think this book, more than any other book I've worked on, has been a real collaboration. It feels like a real collaboration where I think everybody, from our editor to the art director to the production designer, everybody involved has been just done such amazing work for the book. And when I got it back, I just loved it. I mean, I got it back and I got this feeling like, I contributed to this, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I guess put it that way. I feel like I've been part of this amazing project that I feel very fortunate to have been a part of.
And Andrea, what about you?
I totally agree with Jason. This has been a true team effort, and the result is just so much more than I could have imagined. If I could say something about the book itself, is that I hope it sparks discussions among children and students about the various places that their parents or their ancestors are from, and perhaps how some of their own family traditions originated in those places, that we are all a nation of immigrants and we're all also Americans. And I think that the themes in Watercress about hardship and immigration and belonging will hopefully foster empathy for recent immigrants and refugees.
I think that they will, and I'm so excited for readers to get their hands on this beautiful book and start to have those conversations too. The book, once more, is called Watercress. I've been speaking with Andrea Wang and Jason Chin. Andrea, Jason, thank you so much for joining me today on Fully Booked.
Thank you,
Megan.
Us.
That was Andrea Wang and Jason Chin, authors of Watercress, a new picture book out from Neil Porter Books. And now I'm joined by my colleague, Johanna Zwerner, who will be interviewing Melissa Febos with me. Hi, Johanna.
Hello. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making time to do this with me. I'm really excited, and I don't think it could be a better book.
I'm so excited to talk about this book. This is like a book that spoke to my soul on so many levels.
Fantastic. Me too. So without further ado, let's welcome Melissa Febos, author of Girlhood, to the podcast. Welcome, Melissa, to Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to start it out classic, along the lines of what did you want to explore in these essays? What depths did you want to plumb?
That's a very good question. And here's my answer. These essays are basically a catalog of things I absolutely did not want to plumb and that I actively avoided for my whole life up until writing this book.
Right.
I can elaborate on that for you also.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I did not plan on and had no interest in writing a book on the theme of girlhood. And if you went back in time to myself of like, 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 year before I started writing this book and said, you're going to write an essay collection all about your adolescence and it's going to be called Girlhood, I would have just barfed. Because, I thought I had already written about it.
Mm.
And I also thought that nobody cared. And those were sort of two stories that I think were actually just kind of psychologically convenient that I was carrying around. A, because I didn't want to fully process the experiences of my adolescence. And so I was like, that's a closed case. And I had never really written about them directly. I had sort of given them a glancing treatment and been like, for example, when I was slut shamed in grade school, moving on to some other subject. And I think that this idea / fear / question of who cares is sort of this like meta question of the book, because the truth is that I care very deeply, and everyone who grew up in a female identified body that I know cares very deeply about it. But there is this like internalized voice that's like, ew, nobody wants to hear about that, right? Which is exactly how like patriarchy is perpetuated by all of us, right?
Right.
So I was just writing essays, and I wasn't thinking at all about how they were connected, and was like continually surprised by how they kept sort of circling back to this one time in my life. And then my agent was like, what's your next book about? And I was like, I have no idea. I'm not writing a book. And he was like, well, go see what you're writing. And I was like, oh no, I'm writing a book about girlhood. And he was like, cool, keep writing it. So I did.
Yeah, I mean, that moment that you're talking about nobody cares is just like so fascinating to me, because of course, reading this book, I was like, these are all the things I care about. Like, how did she know? She's reading my mind. And especially recently, for whatever reason, throughout this year so far, there's been a lot of talk with me and the people I love about patriarchy and a lot of the ways we've internalized patriarchy. And I don't know, I think I'm so glad that you did decide to continue writing these essays, because I think this is exactly the kind of thing that often does kind of get swept aside. And it's exactly the kind of story that
Thank you so much for saying that. I just like, it's really, as much as, I've been like taking classes in the history of feminism and talking about consent and just like having conversations about things in the constellation of these issues my whole life. And in some way I thought it had cured me. But you can't really be cured from something that you live in. It doesn't ever go away, right? And it's just like so baked into like every part of our culture that like those internalized voices, like I kind of can't get over. I'm just continually surprised by how difficult it is to distinguish like my own thoughts and what I actually know in my own mind from my own experience, and just like the shit that has been programmed into me so that I don't look too closely at it. Like it's still impossible to tell the difference. And sometimes I just have to like barrel forward and wait until other people tell me that that was not my own thought.
I really see that. I mean, in all of these essays, yes, I see this playing out in poignant and profound ways. One inroad probably like I would take to thinking more deeply about this would be the essay, Thank You for Taking Care of Yourself. Mm-hmm. Would you share with our listeners a little bit of what that essay is about?
Sure. So in 2017, a friend of mine sent me a link to something called a cuddle party and said, this seems like something you would be into, haha. And I looked at the link and had such an intense, visceral aversion to it that I knew I had to go, obviously. and I had heard about cuddle parties, which like are sort of like a desexualized, like a cuddle orgy, Mm-hmm. And for whatever reasons that were not clear to me at the time, that just sounded like my absolute worst nightmare. And my experience of myself has been that when I have that kind of visceral reaction to something, it's like a little metal detector, right? Like there's something that needs to be sort of like dug up and looked at and listened to. So I went and I brought my friend and I brought my girlfriend, and, the whole thing was sort of like prefaced by this workshop on consent where we did role playing, ongoing verbal consent, and it was all very sort of like healthy and like San Francisco-y. And then the cuddling portion happened. And, you know, when we left the cuddle party, my friend and my girlfriend were like glowing. They had such a good time. They felt like really fulfilled by it. And there was like no gross feelings. And I was like an oil slick of gross feelings. Like I had such a bad time at the cuddle party. And what I realized, like on the drive home almost immediately, was that the difference between our experiences was that I had consented to cuddling with people when I didn't actually want to. And basically the whole cuddle party was me negotiating and consenting to touch that I didn't actually want. And I was like, I am a lifelong feminist. I know about consent. I've read whole books about it. Like, why is this happening? Yeah. And then I sort of went on like, the essay is kind of like a detective story for me figuring out like, what is the mechanism that still convinces me it's more important to sort of hand my body over to a stranger than it is to draw a boundary based on what I actually want, and sort of how to undo that and really kind of change my relationship to touch and consent.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, I think this maybe touches a little bit on, this distinction that you make between your body as a vessel for yourself rather than your body, as a part of yourself. And, I mean, I wonder, can you talk a little bit about how you approached writing into that kind of discovery and in those kind of situations where you realized like, oh my goodness, my body is telling me something really important right now?
Yeah, this is like sort of a hard thing to talk about because I have not had a lot of experience talking about it. Like writing this essay and writing all of the essays in this book, there were so many things that I ended up writing about that I had never thought about with any objectivity and certainly never tried to describe or speak about to another person. It's like the nature of these kinds of things is that we don't talk about them because we're ashamed of them, right? And so I think for me, it really goes back to like, just like learning to hate my body when I was an adolescent, sprinkled with or like sort of hybridized with like capitalist relating to sort of our bodies as like modes of production, and the way that like American like work culture trains us to just be proud of extracting more from our bodies than is like humanly reasonable or humane, And so like the combination of those things is just, was just deadly for me. So after I went to the cuddle party, I basically sort of reviewed my life. I was like, oh, shit, actually, my whole life has been one of learning how being conditioned and having that conditioning be reinforced to sort of think of my body as this kind of way of proving my worth in the world, both through sort of production and work and also through sort of making other people happy. And the primary way that I, as a woman, can make other people happy is sort of offering my body to them for whatever they want, whether it's like sex or comfort or labor, all of those forms, right? And I was kind of shocked by the degree to which it became almost immediately clear that like whatever the kind of national or feminist conversation around consent is, because it's a really robust conversation. Like affirmative consent legislation is like very real. We talk about it. We've read books about it. We write books about it. But that's so different from our culture and like the daily experiences that we have in public where people want to touch us and they don't have to ask for permission. Or if they do ask for permission, it doesn't feel safe for us to actually say no. And, all of this feels a little bit ironic to be talking about like, a year into a pandemic when like no touch going on. But in many ways, it like that experience has made this experience feel so much more meaningful to me because it's like, I don't know, as I'm looking forward and thinking about moving back into sort of public life and having touch and negotiating these interactions, these like very regular, minute, everyday interactions where like people come in for a hug or whatever, and just, thinking about it in terms of like an opportunity to be really mindful and like do the thing that I learned after I went to the cuddle party, which is to like stop, actually sort of tune into my own body and think like, do you want that? and actually listen for the answer, which like, you know, in the essay I write about how my partner was like, I think we need to go back to another cuddle party, which just like, I just blacked out for a minute when she said that. And then I was like, no, that would be so rude to go to a cuddle party and not cuddle. And she was like, that's why we need to go back.
Right.
So we did. Totally. And I just like said no to everyone, because as soon as I was like, hey, body, do you want to hug that dude? My body was like, no, I hate that dude. I was like, whoa. Okay. That's what happens when you don't listen for like 35 years.
Instead of, you know, the traditional health science class, you know, like this is your period video, I'd rather send young women, you know, to a cuddle party, honestly.
Totally.
Just to say no. Like
exactly.
That is your mission, just to say no.
Imagine, like I truly came to sort of this very earnest place at the end of that experience and through writing this essay where I was like, what if we did that? What if we spent 20 minutes in a fucking health class role playing and being like, you don't ever have to be touched by anyone you don't want to. And like, it's a pipe dream, obviously, right? Because like most kids grow up in families and cultures where it's like, tell them you love them, hug your aunt and uncle, even though they're total strangers. You know what I mean? Like we're really conditioned from like in really sort of completely normalized ways to just think of our body as belonging to other people.
Yeah. Oh
and to not account for any nuance in the process of consent. Just, I mean, even with affirmative consent or even like, as you write about with enthusiastic consent, it's still not super nuanced. And there's still moments like the one that you write about where people are kind of affronted when you ask, you know, oh, okay, well, what kind of cuddling would you like to engage in? Or, you know, how do you want to touch my body right now? You know, and they're like, well, how dare you? You know, it's a little bit of a.
Yep. I mean, it's like, how could it not be when like men have been entitled to women's bodies for all of time? Like literally as far back as the record goes. Right. They have like up until very recently had a legal right to our bodies.
Oh, I have a reading recommendation for you, by the way, Melissa.
Tell me.
If you didn't get a copy of it yet, Women and Other Monsters, Building a New Mythology by Jess Zimmerman. I think that it's going to be right up your alley. I do.
I have totally heard about this book. I do not have it. But it sounds like the sort of nexus of like everything I'm into, basically, which is probably why you're recommending it to me.
Totally. Yeah. And parting pandemic related thought on thank you for taking care of yourself. The essay opens with this really freaky Harry Harlow experiment from the 1960s on infant rhesus monkeys where he deprived them of touch for up to a full year, which hit impossibly close to home right now with Home I Never Leave. And this sentence really scared me. Monkeys isolated for a full year were largely incapable of rehabilitation.
I know. Honestly, Megan, when I was reading about that, so I wrote the first draft of this essay at this residency, which I'm like, oh, remember that? Going to other places and living with other people for a month.
Right.
And I was just sort of like circling this essay and, you know, going in my little Wikipedia rabbit holes. And I started reading these studies and reports of Harlow's work, and reading about it made me literally physically ill. Like I read about it and I wrote like an early version of that paragraph in the essay, and I had to go lie down because I felt physically nauseous because I was so upset by those descriptions. You know, it was, man, super sadistic. And like, what does it mean when we're now sort of, you know, just sort of like the conditions of our global lives are also sadistic. There's not like a horrible mad scientist behind it, but just, I don't even know, a virus, germs.
And by the time you get to that mention of the baby monkeys in the collection, like I've already been set up to be really on high alert. There are all these signposts of like the animal, like human as animal, like animal hunger, the animalistic nature that's inside all of us, you know, and then it's just like, you know, it was a lot.
It's really funny that you should say that, because that's one of those things, like, you know, when you write a book, I have all of my little ideas about theme and whatever, but there's always stuff that other people are like, oh, I really like how you did this. And I'm like, oh, I did do that. And the animal stuff is actually one of those things where it's like within individual essays, I know that I am writing about it. It's like the main topic in some of them, but I didn't quite realize how many animals and how much sort of consideration of like animalness is in the book. And I think it's just like a pure reflection of like my consciousness. Like I actually am just thinking about animals and acting like an animal so much of the time that it seems like a theme I have delicately threaded through all of these essays, but actually it's just me.
I think that's also, it's fascinating too, because I think a lot of those moments when you're talking about, your own desires and your own kind of animal sort of moments of self are often those moments where, you show that you've been disciplined in some way, or that, that side of yourself is discouraged, which, and that might be actually the truest part of all of ourselves, is that animal side. And, instead, I think often for women, it's that side is carefully kind of negotiated and contained. And I don't know, I feel like that was one of the most powerful through lines of the book for me.
That makes me really glad, because I do think, I mean, not even so much in terms of the book, but just in terms of like the way I experience being a human animal in the world is like from childhood. And I do write about this in the book, but it has always felt totally perverse to me that we pretend we're not animals. That like when we say animals, we're never talking about humans. I'm just like, what is wrong with us? And particularly like, my girlhood was really marked by confusion and bafflement and shame, because I felt like such an animal. Like I was like very much like half feral, running through the woods, like being very dirty, like picking scabs and eating them, and like just like licking anything I was curious about, like I'm still totally like this. Like one of my partner's nicknames for me is just the raccoon.
Oh, I love that.
Because I'm always just like rifling around and things and sniffing them and licking them, and the idea that was like gross or bad, and we should try to not be the thing that we are, like as a basic belief of human civilization, just seemed like sadistic,
Completely.
Well, you're the raccoon. I'm known around these parts as the goat, as in I'll goat anybody's remaining food
totally
from the meal, So here we are, a raccoon and a goat.
Same thing. No, actually, I'm so bad about that there was a time in the last week where I was like circling around my partner's plate in the kitchen, and she walked in and like stepped back and did the little raccoon thing, like where they stand up on their hind legs and lift their arms to make themselves look bigger than they are, and I just did that. It's like, you can't, I'm big, these are my trash cans.
It's so funny. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God, I love the image I'm getting in my mind right now.
Yep.
And furthermore, I love the images I get in this book. I mean, one of the things I love about your writing is like all of the indelible imagery. I mean, just in the prologue, I carry all of these images with me, like right from the get. I see knots, I see vessels, I see constellations, I see arms and fingers and holes. And I'm considering and reconsidering what these things mean when they make other appearances in the text. And it's interesting, having read Abandon Me and had the privilege to speak with you about that book, to see certain things repeating. So I'm kind of looking for this is all like a bridge to a question that's kind of far out. When you regard all three of your books, Whip Smart, Abandon Me, and Girlhood, like when you look at them, how do you see them in relation to one another?
I mean, the thing that I sort of picture, and this sort of goes back to your question in another way, which is like, I'm a very, very visual thinker. Yeah. Like I have to write a word in the air with my finger in front of my face to remember how to spell it,
Yeah.
And so when I think about sort of the trajectory of my work across these three books, it really sort of, it's sort of like an interpretive dancer image, which is like, I kind of picture myself like curled up in a ball and sort of like standing up and opening and like turning toward like the camera. I don't know what's there, the eye, but it really, I think of them as kind of a turning outward, where, in my first book, I was like just sort of figuring out how to step into who I was in some way and how to like situate the parts of me that didn't feel like they fit into society and feel comfortable valuing them and like honoring their power. And then in Abandon Me, I think I was looking sort of to like where I come from and like a larger investigation of identity. And this was really expressed sort of through lyric means and like phonics and really sort of digging into language. And I'm starting to integrate some other sources and like figuring out where I fit in kind of like an even larger schema of like psychology and art and history. Right. And in Girlhood, as much as it is sort of like a really intimate confrontation with the events of my early life, the sort of origin story of like all of it, it really is so dependent on this sort of turning outward. There were so many conversations with other women and other texts, and there's like an investigative journalism thread to a lot of these essays. And it really feels like this book was using my experience as a starting point to really sort of look at larger cultural questions and really sort of looking forward to like how things can be different and how I want to manifest my own sort of transformation in the world.
I mean, it's an investigation that we all need to be doing, I think. And I mean, it brings me also to this question I had about, there's a really, really beautiful moment that you described where you were kind of working with your mom at a workshop, and you were kind of doing writing as healing a little bit together and for the others in the workshop. And I was wondering if there's been a particular moment or a particular sort of phase in life when you first recognized that writing could be a process of healing.
Honestly, I think it was all the way back at the beginning. It was like, I was such a weird, intense child. I don't know if you gather that at all from this book, but I was like super emotional and super sensitive and like painfully perceptive / codependent. And there were just like so many parts of like being a person and having a consciousness that I was like, what is this? And why aren't we talking about it? And also I will never speak of it because what if it's only me? And I think, life just felt like way too much. My feelings were too much. Like everything was very intense. And so for me, reading was like such a release valve. And it was just like a way to sort of like get out of myself, but also a way to sort of find company in the experiences that were so lonely because I didn't have language to talk about them and it didn't seem like anyone else did either. And so I think like reading and writing, like I was a little journaler and like scribbling little poems and things when I was like 8, like I really started writing very, very early. I was extremely secretive and extremely verbal. And I think I just was like, I need company in this, even if it's just like the externalization of my own words. So I was like writing things down, writing little stories, keeping journals, like writing poems, writing things in code. I was always like making up a code and writing things in code in my journal. And I just think I just understood like that externalization, that imposing a narrative on like the chaos of like stimulation and experience and putting words to things like helped me live. It made it bearable, and I didn't have like an unbearable or unhappy or like abusive childhood or anything like that. But I just think like childhood is really hard. And like it was for me, being a human is like really overwhelming and hard. And so I think from the very beginning, I identified it as that. And then that became like, once I started writing nonfiction, and that was really sort of in grad school, like in my mid and late 20s, I started writing my first book. And that immediately sort of revealed itself as a process where once again, I was like writing the things I thought I could never say to anyone. And I realized how eager and desperate I was to do that. And then the experience of like writing it and how that completely changed my relationship to those events and like erased shame ultimately. And then became like this really sort of beautiful tool for connecting with other people afterwards. Like there was just no going back after that.
Oh, wow.
Don't go back. Definitely don't go back.
Don't go back. I'm all the way here.
And I can attest as a weirdly intense and intensely weird former child that your book is tremendous company and a tremendous balm for the soul. And I left with a lot of positive messages, really. I felt like I felt more hopeful after reading this collection. And I also felt like revision is good. I felt like changing your mind is good. And changing your mind is growth. And growth is good.
Yes, that is exactly what I wanted, because that is exactly like the place where I arrived through writing this book. And like, that is my goal, is to sort of like demonstrate something, like, I guess make an argument, but make an argument by doing, right? And for me, it has felt, one of the reasons why I was afraid of writing nonfiction before I did was because I was like, I had this impression, once again, like the sort of internalized voice that has nothing to do with my own experience was like, oh no, in order to write nonfiction, you have to be a news junkie and you have to have like very clear, hyper-informed positions that aren't going to change. Like, you can't be backtracking. You can't be a hypocrite, And then I started writing nonfiction and I was like, oh, no. Actually, it's the opposite of that. Like, writing nonfiction is a way to publicly and transparently change my own mind. Like, the negative connotation with changing my mind is so absurd. It's really just the opposite. Like, I want to constantly be changing my mind. I want to willfully be changing my mind. And I want us all to be able to do that. Because imagine a world where we weren't ever allowed to change our opinions about things. It would be a world where all growth was halted. Like, it's a nightmarescape.
It is. I'm looking up. I'm seeing we have time for about one more question, if you're cool with that, Melissa.
Absolutely.
Okay. Johanna, would you like to ask it?
Sure. So, I mean, I wonder, I've talked a little bit about this form of discipline that you've talked about. And I don't know, I feel like, I don't know, there's so many amazing moments in this book where, a woman is disciplined for being angry, or for example, for changing her mind, as we've been talking about, or disciplined even for passively attracting sexual aggression or attention. And I just wonder, after kind of writing through this and after finishing this book, like, how do we all combat that? I mean, and again, this is a huge question, but I guess, I feel like for me, that's kind of the one of the words at the heart of this book is like discipline, and the right that we should be having to change our mind and be,
I really think it is like, personal transformation is sometimes framed as this like glorious process or a triumphant process, or like, I'm going to take my power back. And it's true, but it's like manifested in this incredibly incremental, often very tedious, like daily process of kind of rehabituating the way we think and the way we talk about things. And it's like, I've been trying lately to sort of weed out of my language, sort of ableist language tics. And it's really amazing to me how much they exist in my language. And it's just like, it's just consciousness. Developing consciousness is like really, really slow. And I think what's been incredibly important for me is to surround myself with as many people as possible who are invested in that project, right? So like, like with my friends, when they say disparaging things about their own bodies, or like, ew, I haven't shaved my armpits in a year. I'm like, oh, look at your glossy, beautiful armpit hair that your body is producing to keep you warm and keep bacteria out of your pores. Like, amazing, Yeah. And just like finding ways to sort of reverse those deeply embedded sort of tics and thoughts and ways that we're disciplining ourselves and each other and reinforcing ideas that we didn't choose and that don't benefit us. And that in most cases, like actively harm and constrict us, right? So it's like cultivating awareness, reading things, talking about it, but also this practice of like, just like loving on each other in a way that is like reversing that kind of harm and disparagement in ourselves. My partner suggested this, and it's been a practice of mine for a little while, because we had some conversation where I was like, a lot of the time I'm fine with like eating what I want and feeling okay about my body and not like looking in the mirror and being like, ew, look at you, you know? But that stuff pops. Of course it does. Like I live here, you know? And she said, why don't you make a daily practice of like every day I write morning pages and I have like these little sort of affirmations, or like I write the serenity prayer, or I write like things I want to remember for the day every day. And she was like, why don't you add a line to it about like rejecting the patriarchy's bad ideas, just like as an intention for every day. And so every single day in my notebook, I write, today I reject the patriarchy's bad ideas. Which is just like, I need a reminder, right? Like I need someone to sort of like tap me on the shoulder and be like, hey, that's a bad idea. Like you're actually awesome and your butt is amazing and whatever the fuck you want, you know?
Completely.
So I would encourage listeners to buy a copy of Girlhood by Melissa Febos and write into it, you know, these affirmations and more, and whatever gets you going. And read the damn thing, because it discusses so many of the things Melissa so generously discussed with us here today, things that we don't talk about but should more. Melissa, you already know I'm a big fan. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for joining us.
So much. So happy that this book exists and everybody needs to read it. Seriously.
It's an honor to have you as our guest on Fully Booked.
That was Melissa Febos, author of Girlhood, out now from Bloomsbury Publishing.
Yes, was it ever? That was fantastic. And I'm so glad we got to share that experience with her.
I'm so glad. She was like even more amazing than I could have imagined. Truly, like...
Yeah, very generous. And I feel like these essays are super brave. And I just cannot wait for listeners to get their hands on the book.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for this book to be in the world and for more people everybody, but especially women and girls to read this. I think they're going to be feeling seen and heard on a whole other level. And I really can't wait.
Agreed. And now I can hardly contain myself because we're about to be joined by our editors with their top picks in books for the week.
You're listening to Fully Booked by Kirkus Reviews.
This message is brought to you by Jim Lively, author of Aberrant Behavior. How does a functional alcoholic and possible schizophrenic, who is also a successful attorney for the health insurance industry, handle the demise of a plaintiff due to a technicality that denied him an expensive life-saving procedure? Simple. Charles Pierce retires and books a cruise to escape his meaningless life and personal demons. Little does he know that the dead plaintiff's widow, armed with poison and intent on revenge, has booked the same cruise. Kirkus called this thriller a, quote, twisty, often nerve-wracking tale, end quote. Get your copy of Aberrant Behavior in paperback or ebook on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. This message is brought to you by Alana Horwich, author of Meal and a Spiel. Author and LA-based chef and cooking teacher Alana Horwich wants you to learn how to be a badass in the kitchen. Instead of stressing about homemade food, learn to be an intuitive cook and whip up easy and delicious dishes that make you want to roll on the floor shouting mama. Drawing inspiration from years in Italy, Horwich shares humorous, heartfelt stories and explains the fundamentals of Italian cooking in a super approachable way that builds confidence and gets readers inspired to live la dolce vita, no matter what cooking level you're currently at. This gorgeous, thick denim-covered book will look fabulous on your coffee table and entertain you immensely. Meal and a Spiel is friendly for all diets and healthy without compromising flavor. With gluten-free, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, low-sugar recipes, you'll find everything from burrata crostini with honeyed leeks to a to-die-for no-noodle lasagna, to flourless chocolate blender cakes with, yes, olive oil. Consider this a fabulous chic hostess gift. Meal and a Spiel was featured by Hallmark Home and Family, Real Simple, BuzzFeed, CNN, Reader's Digest, and more. Get your hard copy of Meal and a Spiel on Amazon to become a kitchen badass now. This message is brought to you by Mary Davis, author of Patience, Patience, and the Talking Cure. Have you ever wondered what goes through a psychiatrist's mind as she sits with her patients and listens to them talk? How she figures out how to help them? Or how she deals with hearing about the pain of others all day, every day? In Mary Davis's book, Patience, Patience, and the Talking Cure, she gives you a peek into the day-to-day of a work week for a psychiatrist. Readers get the chance to see how a psychiatrist with decades of experience reflects on each patient and uses her training and experience to decide how to help them, and how that changes her along the way. Patience, Patience, and the Talking Cure was submitted for consideration for the Gradiva Award as the best book on psychoanalysis in 2019. You can find it on Amazon in paperback and ebook, or online from IP Books.
The ultimate insider scoop on the latest books, right here on Fully Booked.
We're joined now by our editors with their top picks in books for the week. We have Young Readers editors Vicki Smith and Laura Simeon, and nonfiction editor Eric Liebetrau. Fiction editor Lori Mechnik is out of the office today. Starting with Vicki, please share with us your choice.
My pick for this week is a book it's actually a graphic novel called A Shot in the Arm by Dawn Brown, and it's part of the Big Ideas That Changed the World series. And it is the very embodiment of timely, because it's a history of vaccination. And so the subject matter is of intense interest to everybody. Whoever would have thought that people would be able to be connoisseurs of different vaccine manufacturers. But this really goes back in time and shows readers both the history of vaccination and how it works. And it's a series of, sort of inventions. And one of the formulas for this series is there is a guide. And the guide through this book is Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, an Englishwoman, she was a real life Englishwoman. She is no longer, who, as a young person had caught smallpox and was quite disfigured, but worse, lost her little brother to it. And when she married a diplomat who was posted in the Ottoman Empire. And when she was there, she heard about a procedure called variolation, which was a precursor to vaccination. And she wanted to protect her son. And so she did this very cloak and dagger operation to variolate her son, and it worked. And so even before Jenner, this was how the idea of inoculation moved from the East into the West. And one of the things I like most about this book is that Brown makes it very clear that Eastern science was way ahead of Western science when it came to vaccination. So there's a history of the many precursors to inoculation, one called insufflation, which was practiced in China. He's got a very warm and appealing drawing style, and also he knows how to, insert a good ewe at, places here and there to keep kids sort of engaged. But he's also really sort of mindful of how to communicate these ideas to young readers. So when he's talking about Chinese insufflation, he says it eventually became an event that Chinese children would experience at 5 years of age, something of a ritual like a first communion, bar mitzvah, quinceañera, or sweet 16. So he contextualizes it in real world examples and really makes kids understand exactly what's going on every step of the way.
Vicki, that book sounds fantastic. It just, and of course, so very timely. And I wanted to recommend a couple of titles. They're from 2018, both from 21st Century Learner, that I think would be of great interest to a similar age group. One's Pandemic by Connie Goldsmith, and the other's Vaccination Investigation by Tara Haley. And they're both science writers, science journalists, and they're just concise and thorough. And for anybody who's, paying attention to current events and wondering about pandemics and, why people might reject the well-established science of vaccination, these would be great reads.
That's a great series, and I really admire Connie Goldsmith's work, so thank you.
Vicki's pick for the week is A Shot in the Arm by Dawn Brown from the Big Ideas That Changed the World series. Thank you, Vicki, for that choice. Next up, we've got Laura. Laura, what have you chosen for us?
I've got A Time of Fear, America in the Era of Red Scares and Cold War by Albert Marin. And I'm sure listeners will be familiar with him. Albert Marin is a very prolific author of riveting nonfiction for young readers. And his latest is a history of the Communist Party of the United States of America. And it's comprehensive. It gives great context, but also a lot of action, excitement to keep readers engaged. And he talks about, the contradictions of American communists espousing progressive values in the U.S., but then ignoring all the terrors of Stalin. He covers anti-communism, McCarthyism, the Lavender Scare. Our review called it absorbing, comprehensive, and timely. And I always think about how some kids are unfortunately put off history by lessons in textbooks that are just this kind of parade of facts and dates, and the human part is erased, the part that makes it so compelling and exciting. So I just wanted to read this one little passage from the beginning that gives sort of a flavor. Marin wrote, "For most of the 20th century, the CPUSA had an impact on American life far out of proportion to its size. On balance, the communist menace, quote unquote, real or imagined, fostered a climate of fear and occasionally hysteria. People will do terrible things to avoid being ruled by those they believe hate them and mean them harm." And it's that kind of writing that's just so clear that really puts you into, the minds of people living at the time, and also invites readers to draw a parallel with the present day and, how might we today be responding out of proportion to imagined fears, that I think it makes his work so compelling. So, if you love Steve Schenken, you'll love Albert Marin. This is a book to look for.
Thank you, Laura. I just wanted to give a good read-alike first, especially about the Joe McCarthy part of that. There's been, a lot of biographies and a lot of stuff written on him, but one of the better ones just came out last year called Demagogue, and it's by Larry Tye, Tye. It's a really pretty long but readable biography of McCarthy and his campaign to basically just root out anyone he felt was undesirable in the political world. And it's well written. It's got, all the kind of machinations going on between him and his cronies, including attorney Roy Cohn. And the author actually ties McCarthy to Trump through Cohn, calling him the flesh and blood nexus between the senator and the president. So it's got this really cool tie to, well, not cool, really disturbing tie to the president. And our reviewer says at the end, he says about Cohn, he taught Trump a cardinal lesson. If you say it often enough, loudly enough, and insistently enough, and frighten your listener while you do so, it becomes true. And I think we've seen that over the past 4 years and continue to see it. So I think for adult readers, that would be a great read-alike.
Wow, that one sounds excellent. And even, 11th, 12th graders, if they're into that kind of things, might really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's a really good popular biography. He's written biographies of Bobby Kennedy and Satchel Paige. So he's pretty well-versed in biography.
Ooh, excellent.
Laura's pick is A Time of Fear, America in the Era of Red Scares and Cold War by Albert Marin. Thank you, Laura, for that choice. And finally, we've got the nonfiction pick from Eric. Eric, what have you chosen for us?
Well, I'm going to stick with Trump, kind of, unfortunately. But the new book by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, who wrote the book Shattered, which was the really excellent and sad account of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. So this is a follow-up on the 2020 presidential race. And, the subtitle it's called Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. And it's really I think some readers will find it surprising how close it really was, even though Biden won by 7 million votes. There are certain things across the course of the campaign that had they gone a different way, Trump would have been reelected. And there's some interesting things in there, too, about how, Barack Obama proclaimed Biden as his brother, but the author said that he had worried that his friend would embarrass himself on the campaign trail. And he actually didn't even call him to congratulate until the networks had finally declared the election. And another little interesting piece as one of the Biden staffers was quoted as saying, if President Trump had just acknowledged there was a virus, even midway in August or September, acknowledged this is an effed up situation and pivoted, we would have gotten crushed. So that's kind of frightening to think about. But
totally,
it's a no-brainer for politics junkies, and I think it offers some really good lessons going forward, especially now that Trump seems to be kind of building his own deep state and looking at 2024.
Yeah, Eric, this seems really interesting. One of the things that has irritated me about a lot of the retrospective reporting on the election that I've heard and read is that it's like as soon as it was over, it was all of a sudden inevitable, and people were saying, oh, right. Yeah, people said that, it was really dumb that he was, sitting in his basement for so long and that he didn't know how to use social media. But no, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. It's like, I really, it makes me mad, that kind of retrospective, everything was going to work out that way. And only Biden could have beat Trump. So I'm really glad that there is an alternative and, measured analysis that actually says, no way. Yeah. And I also am glad that Stacey Abrams gets a whole lot of love in this book, or a whole lot of acknowledgement anyway.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it, as the authors show, is a significant part of her and Black organizers and voters that really got it done.
Eric's choice for the week is Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. Thanks, Eric, for that choice. Well, that does it for another exciting episode of Fully Booked. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us again next week when my guest will be Kirsten Valdez Quaid, whose first novel, The Five Wounds, depicts a year in the life of a family in northern New Mexico. Our reviewer says, quote, perfectly rendered characters anchor a novel built around a fierce, flawed, and loving family, end quote, starred review. So please tune in for that. But until then, you know what to do. Turn this thing off and go read a book.
Thanks for listening to Fully Booked by Kirkus Reviews. Check out new episodes every Tuesday at podcastone.com, on the Podcast One app, or you can subscribe on iTunes.